We have Shri Ajay S. Mehta, the President of Vidya Bhawan Society with us. I welcome you, sir. Thank you for joining and thank you for you'll be sharing your journey with us. We thank you for that. A little bit about sir is that Shri Ajay S. Mehta is currently the President of Vidya Bhawan Society, an educational institute based in Udaipur. He was also the president of Seva Mandir, a renowned NGO in Udaipur, for about 15 years till August in 2018 and served as a chief executive from 1990 to 1999. He was a member of the Rajasthan State Planning Board from 2012 to 2014 and was executive director of the National Foundation for India, a philanthropic trust that supports civic action for promoting democracy and social justice. He would be speaking on curating spaces for attention and love. We welcome you, sir. A wonderful topic, and over to you, sir.
To begin with, I want to express my gratitude to Mr. Bhargav Mistry for inviting me to speak. I'm not a design person, and had I been sensible, I should have declined. But it was a tempting topic. My background has been working in the non-government sector, working on development issues. And when I reflected on the idea of, harmonious livability, I've written it up. So I'm going to just speak from my written notes. My purpose in this talk is to explore how we may restore relations of care and compassion that are available to us as human beings over the centuries. In the book Inside the Haveli by Rama Mehta, she describes relationships in a traditional home where parda was practiced and there were stark inequalities between servants and masters. And yet, in this unequal setting, relationships emerged that were based on mutual care and respect, both amongst the poor and those between masters and servants. Mind you, this is not to justify deep structural inequalities of power, wealth, and status, but to look for spaces where the possibilities of mutual respect, care, and attention are enabled. So, in this book, the protagonist is a lady called Geeta, and she's talking about a senior maidservant called Pari. This is what she says. They knew that she, that is Pari, had to be given the same respect as one paid to a relative. She was a maid only in name, and she never tried to be anything more. Later on in the book, Geeta goes on to say, in those few months, her maid, Dhapu, was her only friend and guide. Dhapu told her the etiquette which is expected of daughter-in-laws. So here she is describing relationships. At the one hand, you have master, servant, mistress, maid-servant relationships. At the same time, there's a talk about there being friendship. There's a talk about giving respect to Pari, who's a maid-servant. Then she goes on to, right in the beginning of the book, describing what society is beginning to look like after feudalism. So the Haveli is about traditional life, and now we're moving into the modern age. And this is what she says. In the new town, the rich and the poor are separated by rose gardens. They do not know each other. They live separate lives. The only thing common between them seems the tarmac road on which the poor too have the right to walk. So here Rama Mehta in this book is anticipating the possibilities that modern society can lead to atomistic social relationships that make us indifferent to those around us. And this is the theme that will run through much of this, whatever little talk I'm giving. As the book progresses, there is an episode where Geeta wants to bring about change in the Haveli. She is thwarted by the maidservants and the elders of the family, that is her mother-in-law and her other senior members of the Haveli, for sending the daughter of a maid, her name is Sita, to school along with her daughter called Vijay. Sita's mother had left her baby and she was humiliated by her husband. Geeta is very angry at their resistance. But on reflection, this is what she has to say. All these years, when they had seen Lakshmi's child, that is Sita, was covered in the cold night. They had given her their share of delicacies to her. They had consoled her when she cried. They had nursed her when she was ill. And all this they did because they knew she was one of them. It was because of them that Sita had not known that what it was to be without a mother. Whereas Gita realized she had watched their love and concern with admiration, but like an observer, looking on but not involved in Sita's life. Going to school would change her, and the maids would resent that, and that she could not replace their attention or love. So, Gita here is trying to say that it's one thing to wish well for Sita, but it's another thing to take care of Sita. So the point I want to make at this stage is that while progress is a good thing, the idea that there should be equal opportunities for all in society, those who promote it need to be mindful that those who resist progress may also have some good reasons. And so here, the point I want to make is, can we emulate the intimacy of the Haveli, where the rich and poor live together and are in conversation with each other, trying to understand each other better, and then arriving at arrangements that are not just more equal, but also take into account the needs of dignity and love. So, I guess as human beings, it's not only equality in terms of material things, but all of us need care and love. And that's something that we need to think harder about and create spaces that permit that. Let me now come to some features of modern life. And I'm drawing on a book by a very famous Polish journalist called Kapuscinski. The name of the book is The Other. And so this is what he says about modern times. What a difficult challenge advances in communication have become in recent decades. On the one hand, they are definitely bringing us closer to each other, but are they really bringing us together? Between person and person, between self and the other. A technological intermediary has been introduced, an electrical spark, an electronic impulse, a network, a satellite. The Hindi word Upanishad means to sit near, to be near. The self has been brought to the other not only by words, but also by being close, by being in direct contact, by being together. Nothing is capable of taking the place of this experience. So Kapuscinski is saying that even though in this modern world we can talk to people across the globe, but the experience of being close is still denied to us. And then he goes on to make some more references to the nature of modern society and the kind of dehumanization that might be going on. So I'm quoting him now, talking of the early decades of the 20th century, he says, because in the first decades of the last century, two new phenomena emerged on the European ground that are previously unknown in history. The first is the birth of mass society, where the second is the rise of totalitarian systems that threaten the very essence of humanity, fascism and communism. I shall come back to the point of what leads to society being dehumanized. But before that, I'm going to quote one more person. He's a Polish cleric, and this may be a little dense, but bear with me. At the start of the origin of awareness of the self lies the presence of you, and perhaps even the presence of a more general we. Only in dialogue, in argument, in opposition, and also in aspiring towards a new community is the awareness of myself created as a self-contained being separate from the other. I know that I am because I know another is. So what Tishna, the Polish cleric, is saying is that we are dependent on each other for our identity. None of us are self-contained in that sense. We all depend on others for who we are and for our sense of well-being. So this is the same idea that Rama Mehta is trying to make, and where she says that maidservants appear conservative, but it is out of care, not indifference to the well-being of Sita. So, the dialogue part, we cannot dismiss the maidservants as being ignorant because they resist Sita going to school, they have their own reasons. Let me now come to something that perhaps interests you more, which is the idea of what sort of spaces should we create if we are to sort of cultivate the idea of care and attention in society. So here I refer to a lecture that a very famous architect Joseph Allen Stein gave in Udaipur sometime in 1987, um, and the lecture is titled Habitat and Environment in 2000 AD. So we are past that, and he's sort of looking into the future when he gives this lecture. And this is what he has to say. Experience has demonstrated that not only good design and economy, but also morality are linked to scale. And he's advocating small scale, not large scale. The increasingly violent expression of aggressiveness, which so brutally characterizes modern urban culture, may well be due in part to the fact that modern city dwellers are deprived of basic genetic requirements of privacy and opportunity to identify themselves with an area which is small enough for an individual to accept and attractive enough to make him desire to be part of a community. So here he's talking about in big cities you can feel rootless, you can feel alone, isolated. Then he goes on to refer to Gandhiji, and I saw the image of Gandhiji in the film that you made, that you presented. This is what he says about Gandhiji. Tragically, Gandhi's life was taken at the moment when India was turning from the freedom struggle and the turmoil of partition towards the construction of a just and viable society. Consequently, the Gandhian heritage is incomplete, and little basic thinking has been done since Gandhi perceived that dignity and grace are more likely results from simplicity and justice than from ever increasing possession. So, this is the classic view of Gandhiji, that he didn't think man would be happy by having more possessions, but you could gain in happiness by simplicity and justice, building a just society. So, to kind of draw the drift of what I'm trying to share is, so we are living in an age that may be called a mass society. That individuals living in a mass society are typified by anonymity, lack of social ties, and indifference towards the other. Large scale industrialization and urbanization, the concentration of wealth, the desecration of the environment, the widespread dislocation of settled communities has created a society in which individuals do not feel responsible for the other, but see others as a threat to their well being. They become susceptible to evil. So, we have seen this in many parts of the world, societies becoming authoritarian, denying human rights, being oppressive, and so on. So, I'm now coming to the end of what I want to say. So to conclude, there is need for us to consciously build spaces and communities where people from different backgrounds can meet and get close to each other, that they can appreciate the globe and our country are enriched, not threatened by different religions, traditions, cultures, and values. We need a paradigm of development, as suggested by Gandhiji, that allows for decentralized modes of living and working, while at the same time having access to opportunities that modern society may make available. And so, informing all choices, whether at the local or macro level, ought to be ethics. Spaces need to be designed so that people can feel responsible for others. Both Geeta, the educated mistress of the Haveli, and the maidservants felt for Sita. They had different views but similar concerns. Their differences were resolved by constant dialogue and mutual respect. So, as our society gets torn apart by ever sharpening communal tensions, economic disparities, and unemployment, we need to relook at how relationships and spaces can lend themselves to love or attention. And this phrase, love or attention, I've taken out from inside the Haveli. So, let me conclude my remarks, and I hope if you have any questions, please do share them. I'll respond as best as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing something which is definitely the need of the hour to build up spaces that has ounce of love and especially the part where the mass urbanization is there, a lot of capitalism is there, and we have forgotten somewhere to be that care which was there in the earlier generations, and of course the planning of houses and spaces where it was taken up as a very important part. Today the urbanization has somehow reduced it to a level where we have become very self-centered, and our houses and our spaces do reflect that. So thank you so much. It's a wonderful topic. I was really into whatever you said. And so we do have some, as we'll be waiting for people who actually can ask questions. I do have one question, sir. And as designers, and we are from the design field, and we, in our design process, we actually, get to the core of the problem or the opportunity area. The first part of building anything is to probably understand the opportunity area, the core idea. So when you have been running an NGO for the past 15 years, and you were a part of the planning team as well. So once we have to plan a space, or we have to plan something which is in a bigger way. And so what is the ingredient when that you feel is important when we have to build up the space for love? And considering that you've understood how the psyche of people are when running an NGO. So if we have to design, let's just say, a space or houses, or let's just say an entire city for that matter, what for love and for the to nurture love, care, what is that special ingredient that we as designers should look forward or should inculcate in our design process?
Thank you for Purva for this very good question. And so, the thought that comes to me in trying to answer it is, can we have, in whatever we design, um, spaces where all kinds of people can come together, rich and poor, people of different religions, different backgrounds, different points of view. So, uh, in the NGO that I've been connected to, the term used for such a space was jajam, a space where when you sit on the jajam on the floor, you're equal. Then it doesn't matter whether you're a powerful politician or a poor tribal villager. In that space, you are an equal. Now, so when you're designing something, can you create such spaces where everybody feels welcome? To let me give you an example in Udaipur, since I belong to Udaipur, many years ago now, maybe about 35, 40 years ago, um, something called Shilpgram was created, a space where people could enjoy village architecture across the western region of the country. But entry was very low cost, and it was a large space. So they had folk dances, craftsmen, architecture. So a nice thing to have in a city where, and the food was street food, very cheap. So that's the kind of imagination that comes to me, where perhaps, as you kept emphasizing, there's the possibility of love and care, not only vis-a-vis each other, but also vis-a-vis nature. Something that I didn't bring up in my talk. So let me stop here.
So, and so what do you see that, I mean, in the present scenario, what is something that we lack? I mean, we are building spaces, and what is something that the world is lacking when because there is a lot of building, spaces. Suddenly, people have become much more, what you say, aware of building spaces, whether it is, but what do you still feel that is lacking in the present scenario, considering that there is a huge transformation of building so many things, and the houses have changed, all of that?
Yeah, so if one takes a sort of a planning view, So when we're building houses or designing a larger space, we need to be mindful of places which are common to everybody. Again, rich and poor, could be parks, playgrounds, space for dhabas where the cost, not only cafes where the sort of middle class can go, but also spaces where people who don't have that kind of money. So that's something that we need to be mindful of, because all of us are enriched if we get to know the other. Today in Udaipur, as you may have all heard, we had a terrible communal incident. Somebody stabbed somebody else. Um, the tragedy is that many of us don't know how to reach out to those who have suffered or those who may suffer. So, how does one connect communities together, especially those that are normally not meeting in the normal course of the day? As the inside the Haveli says, now the poor only share the tarmac road. Earlier, they lived in the same spaces. They were interacting in an everyday sense. Of course, it was unequal. So I'm not. So this is the thoughts that come to me, but it's a very good question, and I feel again going back to Stein, his idea was people should live in smaller communities, but they should be high transport networks that allow them to come to the city to enjoy some of the benefits, but they should belong to small communities where there is intimacy. So if you were a town planner or planning for a region, then what you would look for is not highly concentrated urban centers, but places where there's dispersed communities, and then good transport that allows you to access facilities that perhaps need to be concentrated.
Um, so there's one question that is there. So question by Shagun Gupta. So she's asking that which was the main element that inspired you to create these spaces? Like what has been your inspiration when you were planning these spaces?
Yeah, so you know, it's a good question, and I don't know if my answer will answer the question, but see, one of the things that all of us want in life is work that is meaningful, and all of us, irrespective of our levels of education. So, you people are highly educated, you're going to a design institute, but the carpenter or mason that might build the building that you design is also highly skilled. He may not be formally educated, but he has a sense of design, he has a sense of the material, he has a sense of space, and he has his own needs of dignity. So we need to organize work and in a way that everybody's skills come into play as opposed to only the educated. So my feeling is, and I could be wrong, today India is centered around those who are educated. They feel that they have the answers to our problems, that they know more than those who haven't been to school or haven't been to college. But that's not quite true. So the work I've done for many years is with NGOs, and one of the NGOs is called Seva Mandir. It works in villages. Now, in villages, villagers know much more about nature, forestry, water conservation, agriculture, and social relationships on how to bring people together. Now, that's not something that the educated class necessarily knows a lot about, because it's a different rhythm to life. So, how does one create spaces where their knowledge and experience is as valued as the knowledge and experience of highly professionally qualified people? So, my inspiration, going back to that good question, is, you know, we have to recognize that formal education is not the only way you get the ability to do good things in society, and to be ethically relevant. That capacity is not linked necessarily to formal education, and therefore we need to again, yeah, privilege other forms of knowledge, other forms of experience, which I feel we don't do, and yeah, so that's my sort of vision for how we might go forward um, um, in, living our lives, making our societies better.
So I think what really struck me was that learning is beyond the formal paradigm. There's a lot outside, especially when we have to build spaces or live the how. So that's the beauty of design education also, that there is a lot of free element. It is not bounded, and you rightly said that as if we need to build something, we need a very a complete look, and that complete look is not capsulated in a formal manner. We have another question by Bhumika. Do you think that ego has taken over people who, which have the time seen decrease in spaces where people can come together with different communities? I'll read the question once again. Do you think that ego has taken over people and which has, with the time, seen decrease in spaces where people can come together with different communities? So,
So, um, I think what is what is this formulation is very interesting because the way our lives are configured. If you happen to be middle class, you live in a middle class colony, so your only relationship to the poor may be the domestic help that comes to clean your apartment or drive your car, or clean the complex where you live. And we never get to see another part of their lives. We don't know that these are people also who are thinking politically, who are acting politically, who have needs that are not fulfilled, who have children who are not getting good education. So I won't say it's that our ego has become more self-centered, but the way our lives are structured, we are not meeting people of a different kind. So if you're a Hindu, it's likely that you live in a complex with Hindus. If you're a Muslim, it's likely you won't get a place to live in a Hindu community, because it's difficult to know why we have become prejudiced, and that's a long story. But I know so many Muslim people who are not given rental accommodation in societies you know, which are mixed. Now, and so I think growing up also we're not meeting enough people who are other than us. Not so. If you're middle class, you'll go to a school of middle class people. If you're poor, you'll go to a school where they're all poor people. But we're not. We haven't created places where we meet each other as equals, if you like. In schools, in public spaces, um, and so yeah, I don't know about the ego, but there's some kind of forced isolation that makes us indifferent and therefore more easy to manipulate. So we are fed stereotypes. That such and such people are like that. We have never met them, so we can't challenge that stereotype, and therefore we start to believe in stereotypes and demonize people that we shouldn't. So yeah, I think we're all capable of, I think, recognizing the other as being important. In fact, central to our sense of who we are, which is what Kapuscinski says in his whatever book, The Other. But yeah, it's a very good question, and we should ponder over it. Why are we becoming so atomized and isolated? And what can we do to change it? How can we get to know the other? And that other could be many others. It could be the poor, it could be somebody of a different religion, it could be of a different gender, etc., etc.
sir, being from a different field of design, wanted to know what, according to you, are the principles or points to remember to build a harmonious design?
Yeah, so one thing that when I was thinking about what I should say in this talk, was can we build spaces, communities where there's more face-to-face interaction, where we get to know the other, and hopefully also do things with each other. So try to imagine or build spaces where it is inviting to those who we normally don't meet. And so I would say that kind of intimacy should be a principle. The second principle, of course, which is well known to all of you, is whatever you build should be in harmony with the context, with the weather, with the local material. That was Stein's greatness, that he was very sensitive to the environment. And as he says, in the Indian context, it's easy for the inside outside to so be in tune with because of the nature of the weather. So that's the other thing, we all know we are living in an age of climate change and we've been terribly extractive. So that could be the other principle. How do we minimize waste? How do we minimize energy? How do we harness benefits of nature in whichever way? So the two principles, I guess, being sensitive to nature, and the second is how do we foster intimate relationships, especially with those that we normally don't meet in the course of our daily lives. How do we sort of bring them into our lives and get to know them?
Can you recommend us some books, because you talked about the Polish architect, and you've taken some pointers from different books. So as designers are also great readers as well. So what books would you suggest our design students and academicians also for the topic, for the same, that we should be very keen in reading?
You've stumped me. To be honest, I spoke a lot about this novel Inside the Haveli. So I would recommend it, but you have to also discount my recommendation because it's my mother who wrote that book. But it is a good book in terms of understanding what close living can do, even in situations where there's stark inequality. I would certainly say if there's any material written by Joseph Allen Stein, look at it. I'm unfortunately not very aware of literature in the field of design and architecture, but Stein, I think, if I quoted one of his public lectures, but he may have written more, but do read him because I think he was a person thinking about how we can make the future better. And then I would suggest you read Gandhiji. Maybe that should have been the first on the list. And I'm just saying it, and it's a classic, but his classic called Hind Swaraj. He wrote that in 1909. It's a criticism of modern civilization. It's a plea for living in harmony with nature. It's a plea for modest consumption. It's a plea for respecting all religions. And it's a big plea for non-violence. Maybe that is the book that you should read, not the other books that I talked about. And anything by Gandhiji, I think, could shape your outlook on design and architecture because I think he is very aware that at the end of the day, it is relationships that matter both to each other and to nature. And whatever we can do to ensure that these relationships are of a deeper kind, getting to know the other. And even if we have differences, which is what I try to say, resolve them through dialogue, not through force. And if our buildings can encourage that, where we can sit around a cup of coffee, do things together, that I think would help your design sensibilities. So Hind Swaraj is the book you should read.
Okay, thank you, sir, for this wonderful topic, first of all, which talks about harmony and love and attention to all these things which are forgotten very easily with lifestyle. I think I'm lucky, and people who joined, they're also lucky because this is a topic that needs attention, and we here discussed about it, and especially with your experience, of course, our knowledge has got, we haven't got enriched. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Apurva, for bearing with me and for all the wonderful questions. As I said, I'm not a designer, and so once I said yes, I had to really think hard and make up a story, but it's been a very interesting journey for me. I'm very grateful to all of you at Arch College of Design for inviting me. Thank you.